So we're going to be making some placemats, and we're going to be doing a really nice mitered outer edge. And on this miter that we're creating with this technique, we're going to show you how to create that edge so that it keeps the design centralized and gives you a little bit of the backing. And so on the placemats that I'm showing you, we've got the backing of the placemats is the same as the backing for the dinner napkins. So we're starting off with this one with a pre-printed panel of placemats, and the instructions for what the sizes are for all of these are in the printed instructions that you've been given or you've picked up from us. And what we're looking at here is that this is a pre-printed panel from our friends at Wilmington. They do a lot of pre-printed panels with the placemats. And what I like about this is in the instructions, it does tell you that normally when you make these, you sew them right sides together with another fabric, turn it inside out, put a batting in it. And I wanted it to have a more formal look. So one of the first things that I'm doing is I'm measuring around the placemats to see how much leeway I have on the sides and through the middle. And in this one, it's the space in between them is about 1 inch, and then there's about a half of an inch on the outside edge. So the first thing I'm going to do is I first ironed it all out and got it as flat as I could, and then I'm trimming it a half an inch away from the border on this. And the border on this particular placemat, and on a lot of placemats that are pre-printed, is designed so that you would, if you were to sew it right sides together, that border, that outer piece, is going to serve as your seam line that you're going to be sewing it and turning it inside out. And on this one, I want to preserve it, so I want my miter to come around this. So this half an inch that I'm leaving away from that border piece is going to give me the leeway to tuck my miter right up to that edge. Now, if you notice along the sides of this panel, we have some cute little border motifs. And we're going to preserve those because we can actually make those as napkin rings. And so we're going to be using that little motif and setting it aside. Now, if you don't want to use like a pre-printed panel, this same technique works really well if you have a 12-inch finished block. So a 12-inch finished block would be 12.5 inches. And on this, when we've got that edge around there, I'm trimming it out. And this one actually happens to be a 12.5 inch by 16.5 inch. So if you were going to enlarge that out like a 12-inch finished block, which is measuring 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches, all you'd have to do is put either a strip on the left and the right side of it as a sashing, or you could actually just put it all on one side of a pieced block, and you could do the same technique with a pieced element. You can also use these centers if you don't have pre-printed panels to work with. You could do machine embroidery. So there's a lot of options. As sewists, we have access to all kinds of amazing design fabric, so you're not limited by what placemats a department store carries for you or something you can buy online. You can match anything up. You can coordinate it directly with your dishes by starting with your dishes and then picking fabric to go with your dishes, as opposed to, looking for something that all is matched and, questioning the quality of it. Now, I'm doing a little bit of math on this, and so the first thing that I'm doing is I'm layering this up against Battleizer, and Battleizer is my product of choice. When I'm drawing my lines on there, I'm using a chalk aligner, and with that chalk aligner, what I've done is I'm choosing a 30-degree angle so that my diagonals are a sharper point. And then what I'm going to do is I've got that measurement that's around the outside edge, and I'm only going through the Battleizer. And I like Battleizer because it doesn't break down. It gives me a nice stable piece to work with. And so I'm trimming it away from the edge of the design because we're going to pair it up with our miter that we put around the outside edge. And that miter, again, I want it to come right up against that edge. Now, the mitered placemat pattern that we have is one that shows you all these measurements, how we get this in there. Now, going through here, I want to show you how, when I quilt it, I actually just quilt it with a walking foot. And you can see I've got that little chalk aligner going around there, and I just will travel along the outer edge of that placemat. And I'm only going through the Battleizer. I'm not going through the backing of this because I really don't need this quilted down like very tightly. And so those lines are 3 inches apart. And by using those diagonals, I don't have anything that's going to interrupt my motif. I also come up with a really beautiful diagonal diamond all over this piece. And so as I sew along this, I just keep sewing around until I get the whole thing quilted. On this one, I experimented with some variegated thread that I had in my stash. And this is a great chance to play with pretty threads. I lengthened my stitch out considerably when I sewed this on. And then once I'm done with doing the quilting, I trim out, and as you can see, I've got a margin around the outside edge that goes even past my panel. And that's because when I do my miter around the outside edge of this, I want that miter to show up. I want that border from the miter to show up against it and preserve that line. So in this one in particular, I'm going to bump that miter right up to the edge, the outer edge of that yellow line, so I preserve the integrity of the whole design. The other thing about this technique is that you're going to see when we do this, then we want to preserve that outer edge. However, when you're working with anything that's printed on a panel, it most of the time comes out pretty square, but occasionally you'll have maybe a side that looks like it's tipped out. I don't want to be disrupted with that. Again, with something like that though, we are the ones that see that. The person that receives it usually doesn't see it as profoundly as we do. So we're a little too hypercritical of ourselves. So on each one of these, I'm going ahead, and when I sew these, I don't mark all of them and then go to the sewing machine and do them all. I actually do them incrementally, so if I made a mistake on one, I'll catch it on my first one. And so I'll do all the quilting on this and then move on. The other reason I don't like marking all of them and then going to the sewing machine, one is that you're creative, and creatives have a tendency to get bored if they do too much of the same thing over and over again. So this getting up and going and getting another one ready, it helps you with honoring who you are. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to lay it up on the backing fabric. And so my backing fabric has a measurement that goes around the outside edge, and I'm trimming that out. Now before I go too far with this, when I trim it out, I have put some pins in there. I love my flower head pins on this. I use the ones that I can iron on, and then I trim around the outside edge of this, measuring away from the frame, because when I test this, I want to see that I'm going to be able to turn it under 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to be able to turn it in so that it comes right up as close as I can get it to that framework. So I go around and I trim every side out. Now the measurement that I trim out with this, it means that when I fold it over that battleizer, it has to be so that it comes around the battleizer, that edge around there, and then it's right to that edge. So my favorite tool is a hot hammer ruler. I love this little tool. And what I love about it is that I'm able to put the hot hammer ruler underneath the whole outer edge of that placemat, my backing fabric. And remember, my backing fabric is not attached to this. And then I walk that along that edge and I iron right onto it 1/4 of an inch. And so I do that 1/4 of an inch, and then I test it and I see how far over it needs to be. And when I did that testing, I saw that it does actually, that's the right distance away. So now what we're going to do is if you notice on this one, I'm actually turning it under on both sides. I use my hot hammer ruler. I also consulted a really good resource, which is Linda Lee's technique. And what she does is she has you pin into this. And that resource on Linda Lee's book on mastering miters is one of the best ones that I know that's out there. And there's a couple of ways of doing this, so I'm going to show you a couple of them. So what we've done here is we've measured 1/4 of an inch away from that corner. And if you notice with this, I'm putting the pins in there to match it up to make sure I'm in the right piece. Now, if you notice, this is the first one that I'm doing, so I'm actually going to show you 2 techniques, and one is taking the pins and pinning it into place, and then that's my stitch line. And then what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to sew them together, and if you notice, when I turn it right side out, I now have a mitered corner in there. And so I can clip a little bit of that corner out if I want to, and then I'm going to tuck it through there, and I'm going to use my point-to-point turner, and I'm going to tuck that point out, and then I'm going to use the other side of the point-to-point turner, which is a Hera, and I'm going to press that seam into place. And you can leave that seam open. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Hera and I'm going to lightly press around the outside edge of this. Now on this one, I'm going to measure 1/4 of an inch away from the outer point of that placemat. And you see the line that I put there, that's the line right at that. And this is a stitching line. So this, again, this is Linda Lee's technique. So you see the stitching line that I've put in there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to match those 2 pins right sides together. So I turn it up and I match the 2 pins together because that is a stitching line. And so then I'm going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch in place there. Now when I do this, I actually start about 2 stitches away from the opening and go backwards so that I don't have a thread on the very outer point of that. And then on this one, I'm actually going in and I'm putting a pin in both of the places again. I bring them right sides together. By folding them up backwards to each other. And then I got my stitch line. So that dark line that you see on there, I marked that with a duo marker and then I stitched it out. Now, at this point, all 4 of my corners on this first one are done. And so at this point, I'm going to take my flathead pins and I'm going to pin baste all the way around the outside edges. Do not skip this step. This is a really important step for it to lay nice and flat. And so I walk around the whole outside edge of it and I pin it with all the edges. And as you notice, I'm putting those pins in horizontally to the way that I'm going to go into the machine. And then at this point, when I go to the machine, I can use a couple of ways of stitching it. I like to use it like you can use just a standard presser foot, but a lot of times I like using a foot with an edge guide, and that would be like a number 10 foot. And you can use a decorative stitch on here. I'm going to say for the first time you do this though, don't do that to yourself. Just do a straight stitch and then go around the outside edge. Now if you notice when I look at the back of it, on this one I used a variegated thread in the top and on the back because I had kind of a busy fabric. And again, I had the thread, and so this is a perfect one to use for it. This technique doesn't use a ton of thread. It's not like you're going to even use a whole spool of thread on this whole technique to do all these placemats. So you can see when I turn it over, the back of this is all the one fabric. And if you notice, my pineapples are going the right direction on the 2 sides and the bottom. Up on the top, they're upside down. If it was yours, it would bother you. That it's mine, it doesn't bother you. So, that's just some wisdom to say, it's probably time to get over that. If the pineapples are upside down, I'm quite happy with it. The pineapple fabric made me happy, and I like the way that works with it. So this turned out really good. It was a really fun placemat to do. I love the little sayings on this. If you have a friend who has a beach house, in Florida, this is a great one. Or this is just great for summertime fun. And these are some of the placemats. Several people got they got the whole set free when they came to our first open house in this year, and this was so everybody that attended that one got a whole set of the placemats and the dinner napkins and all the fabric for the top and the back, and also the pattern that describes all the details that you see in here. So I go on and I'm going to continue with the same technique with all these placemats. Now the important piece of doing it the way that I'm showing you is doing one complete one helps me to stay ahead of this, so I'm not making a mistake on all of them that, once I've marked them and things like that, and so by doing that first one, the worst I could possibly be out would be one backing, because as you notice, everything that I just did doesn't impact the placemat or the battleizer. It only impacts that backing fabric. So by working incrementally and doing a complete one, I was able to get some techniques that I knew that I needed to be better with on this. Now on this one, on the first one, some of the things that I found was I was not using like a tailor's awl, like an Annie's tailor's awl, to be able to guide that fabric in when I was top stitching. So I got a couple of bubbles in it. So that was a little bit of a snafu. I also wasn't as happy with my technique on my first miter. So you'll see me using another technique. They're both the same technique, and it's possible that the first one didn't work out as well because it was the first one. but I'm also going to show you another technique so that you have multiple ideas of how to do this. And like I said, that first technique came out of a really good little spiral booklet that we carry, and it's Mastering Miters by Linda Lee. It's a terrific book for not only mastering traditional miters, but if you have something that's asymmetrical, if you have something that has a sharper angle than a 90 degree or a 45 degree, it's really, really a good publication. So on this one, I'm going in, I've done all my folding under, so I've got my 1/4 inch. And then what I'm doing at this point is that I am actually lining up my ruler, so it's at a 45-degree angle, and I trimmed it 1/4 of an inch away from the corner, the finished corner on this. And then I was able to sew that together, right sides together, and then I press open the mitered corner, and then I was able to take that and put my point-to-point turner in there, and I worked on entirely one whole corner on each one of them. Now keep in mind that everything is pin basted together. The battleizer and the panel from the top are pin basted through, so I can do a whole corner and it doesn't disrupt the evenness of the backing up against the front. And so I can work around this whole placemat and do each corner and kind of audition it and decide, you know, did I need to move over a little bit? Did I cut it sharp enough? And so it gave me the chance to still explore this and see how it was turning. The other thing is I like the celebration of being able to look at each corner as they go along. And I'm going to tell you that, you know, in situations like this, my 3rd corner and my 4th corner are way better than my 1st and 2nd corner. By the time I got to my 3rd placemat, it was near perfect. So again, you see where we're coming here, I'm trimming it 1/4 of an inch away from that battleizer corner, because that's the outer corner of my whole placemat. And so giving myself that 1/4 inch, I'm able to sew a 1/4 inch seam in there. Now when I do that sewing, I start first at the outer miter, and then I back up my stitches. So I move ahead a little bit, and then I back up my stitches, then I go to forward. When I get to the end of that piece, at the point of the miter, I take 2 stitches back and then I stop. And then I don't take a big back and forth when I do the edging off, because that is a corner and I don't want to put a lot of bulk in there. So as you notice with this one, I turned in my 1/4 inch on everything, then I do my trimming. Then I turn it over, I pin the right sides together of the backing, head to the sewing machine, stitch it out. Would I ever pin all of them and stitch them out? Maybe on my 3rd placemat or my 4th placemat, I might. I just think that we get in a hurry, and when we talk about things like this where we look at these mitered corners, these mitered corners are something that we are going to critique a lot on our own. This technique also works really well for a lot of other things. I use this for if I put cuddle on the back of a quilt and I want this mitered edge coming around the front. So this technique is one that you're going to find yourself using quite a bit. I use this technique as well on a lot of table runners. And it's really nice because it gives you a nice formal looking finish that you can't find anywhere else. And when we do these pieces, they have the battleizer in there. I love the battleizer because it has a layer of stabilizer in it. And then the reason that it's important is it has the cotton batting in it, but inside that cotton batting it has a stabilizer imbued in it. That's because cotton batting is designed to get softer and more like a quilt. Well, I don't want that for my dinner placemats. I want them to be a little bit firm. I like having the batting in there, but I want it to be a little bit more firm. So that's where this piece puts in here. Now this is really one of my favorite ones where I saw that little watermelon rind coming around. So the last 2 that I waited till the end to do were the ones that had borders that were not quite so distinct. So on these last ones, my border around the outside edge is just a slight shade darker than what the background fabric is. Now, when we put this together, on your instructions, it tells you how much yardage you need total for this. If you were going to make these placemats, you know, from something else, you would need about, I think it's 2 1/4 yards to do the backing for all the placemats and the backing for the dinner napkins. and then you need 1 yard of the insert that you put inside of the dinner napkins. So my backing to my placemats is the same as my backing to my napkins. My dinner napkins are double layers of fabric so that I have right side and wrong right side, a two-sided dinner napkin. And again, that dinner napkin is really a classy looking dinner napkin because it's got a formal finish to it, which is this really elegant looking miter around the outside edge. Now remember, anything that you are auditioning to use this technique, you might, I've had some people who have said, well, they tested it out with a piece of paper first to see how wide that has to be. I wish I could tell you there was an exact math to it, but when you don't know how wide that border is going to be, I mean, you might have a placemat that's asymmetrical, maybe two sides, maybe the verticals have wider, a wider boundary around them than the horizontals. And so, what you're looking at is you're looking at something where you can make that outer edge the same width for everything. But again, if you're looking at Linda Lee's book, you'll see what happens if the two sides are different, or you want, mitered sides to be narrower than the top and the bottom. That it is explored in that book, and so those are some advanced techniques. For now, let's just settle in and learn this technique well and be able to get it into place. As you can see, it turned into really a classy set of placemats. I think I got to the third one before I really realized that pineapple fabric was directional. I knew it was directional, but then I had one of those rut row moments where I was like, what if I put it on wrong? So, I would probably have left it, to be honest. I don't think I would have been traumatized by that it was different, and I don't know that I would unsew it, but I could if I had to. Charming placemats, just a really charming placemat. And you can see with the battleizer in there, the corners on that are nice and square. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start working on the napkins. So I've got the backings of my napkins, and I'm actually stacking this up with 4 layers of fabric because I'm confident to be able to cut all 4 of the layers at one time. Now I cut it as a square, and then those instructions are the sizes are in your instructions. First thing I do is I turn those edges under 1/4 of an inch, and I'm pressing them into place. And now at this point, I'm going to mark that intersection, and the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to do it as if so you can see the corner in there. So I'm cutting this out, and I'm going to be sewing it, and that's really where this piece is. Now you can make this smaller than your placemats. You don't have to make it the same width. So then you get a nice big piece with this. And if you notice, the corner of that dinner napkin is 1/4 of an inch away from where I'm going to trim it. There, and this one you can see where I drew that line. That's my sewing line. And again, I'm putting those pins in that intersection, going to the sewing machine, stitching it into place, pushing that point out, and turning it right side out. Now on this one, I'm taking it 1 inch away from my outer edge from my 1/4 inch. So this isn't as big of a turn as what I made on my placemats. So on this one, I'm trimming out that corner at the 45 degree angle, 1/4 of an inch away from my outer point of that. Now, when it came to the dinner napkins, I did stop trimming out that point because what I found when I turned it right side out, it actually makes a 45-degree angle that the bulk of that seam doesn't interfere with the corner, and it actually miters itself in, and it fits really nicely, and it's really square. And as you notice on this one, I'm going in here, and then I'm taking my hot hammer ruler and I'm walking it along that edge because I don't have the battleizer to define where that edge is. So now, as I've turned it in, I'm walking that ruler along all the edge of this to make sure I have it 1 inch along that edge when I turn it under. Again, I don't have the battleizer to inform what size that square is, so I really need to do a good job of pressing this. And so once I get that whole piece done, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my other fabric and I'm going to tuck it in underneath that miter. So on this one, I have, this one in particular, it has little seeds in there, so I'm going to cut it as a square. But before I trim this out, I measured it up against what size of piece is going to fit inside that dinner napkin and underneath those mitered edges. So it can have 1/2 inch in there, because remember that turnover on that was 1 inch. I could make it all the way to the edge if I wanted to too. So that would definitely be another way to do it. But I chose not to do it. And again, I'm cutting 4 layers at a time on this because they're all going to be the same piece. Now, if I had a fabric that didn't have a right side and a wrong side, like a linen fabric or a batik fabric, I maybe wouldn't even have to put this lining in the middle of it. But this one in particular has a right side and a wrong side, and I want my dinner napkins to be looking good on either side of them. So as you notice, I'd go ahead and I tuck that in around that whole edge, that whole outer edge. And then I am definitely going to be pinning it into place. And then I'm going to be using my edge stitching, and I'm going to edge stitch away from that outer edge. Again, I used my variegated thread to walk all the way around that outside edge. And I'm using my flathead pins, my flathead flower pins, to go around the whole outside edge of this. These are some of the nicest dinner napkins you'll ever use, and they're also, I have a couple of sets of them, and these things just wear really well. They don't look all beat up after you've washed them one time, and you don't have to starch them every single time. I am prone to like go take them to the iron after they're washed if somebody's thrown them into the dryer. They do stand up really well, and when I iron these, I just turn them over and iron them from the back. And the reason I do that is then I don't accidentally push up that hem a little bit, and they iron way faster. And I don't use starch on them because they just really, they press up really well. Get yourself, go out on the internet and look for some cool ways to fold up your dinner napkins. Great little gift. And continue on and make all 4 sets of them. It just really is a nice finish. Plus, you probably have the fabric for some of these. I know we all have a tendency to collect some seasonal fabrics and dinner napkins is a nice little finish for somebody to have a whole set of matched ones. I take these a lot too when I get invited for, white elephant drawings or things like this. People like this sort of thing. You can't find anything that's as nice as what you can sew. This is one of those, just really shows off your skills really, really well. People are always amazed that, first off, they're amazed that you've made it, but secondly, that it doesn't look homemade. And this is a really elegant looking set and would be a really great gift. Hopefully you've gotten some ideas of some things that you can do with them. Great way to use up a lot of fabric. This whole project's about 3.5 yards. So if you notice here, what I'm doing at this point is I'm taking those little strips and I'm making them into napkin rings. So what I've done is I've just sewn a backing onto them, and I put a button on them, a button closure. I didn't even put a buttonhole, and then just, ran my dinner napkins through those. Cool stuff. Thanks so much for being inspired to sew with us. We look forward to helping you be inspired to sew more and more and more.